One of the bigger issues we had at this last round of Hot Pit Auto Fest was this car was still having fuel cut issues. Today we're gonna fix that. Now, I say still having fuel cut issues because this has been a problem really since I started competitively drifting this car. Which makes sense. It's kind of a problem with Zs in general. If you're familiar with how Zs are set up, they have what's called a saddle tank. Basically, one gas tank that goes over the trans tunnel or drive shaft tunnel, and it's like two pieces. Well, it's one piece, but it's two parts, the small little crossover thing. So it's easy to get fuel slosh when you're drifting, especially like a long banked turn. Fuel's all going to one side, which ends up giving you fuel cut. And if you've been following the build since we kind of took on the whole pro car vibe, I was really trying to avoid spending a ton of money on a fuel cell. They're very expensive if you want to go with a legit FIA certified, like a Radium or Nuke Performance or Fuel Labs or any of the big names you see in like FD and stuff. They're really expensive. I was trying to avoid that. So I'm running a stock gas tank that is cut in half. I have a custom top hat for the gas tank. So where the fuel pump, where my inlet and outlet lines go to, it's just a piece of metal, kind of like how S13, S14 would be. Instead of like a plastic hanger and all the junk that's built in these from the factory, I just have a piece of sheet metal with a hanger. Very simplified setup. Still getting fuel slosh issues. If I ever have less than like 3/4 of a tank, we get fuel cut. Really annoying, has caused issues in the past. And to be fair, I'm sick of it. I'm over it. I am tired of having the excuse be my car and issues related to my car. So we're fixing that. As you can see, I've already started cutting. So first I removed my rear firewall, large piece of sheet metal that bolted all the way up here and then came down and bolted to this. This is part of the factory nonsense that's back here. I started cutting it out already. I had to cut it in half because I didn't want to disconnect my hydro lines here. So obviously I'll have to make that look nice, but almost done getting rid of this. And then we can get the stock gas tank out, rather modified stock gas tank, and start making room for a big fuel cell that hasn't shown up yet. Now, if you weren't subscribed back in the day when I removed all the sheet metal out of the back of this car, maybe you missed how this is done. So these are all spot welded in. This is the same for all the sheet metal that's back here, right? The regular speaker thing and the bar that comes across, it's all spot welded in. Get yourself a little file with maybe some fresh sandpaper and find the spot welds. They're usually little like divots here. And then you're just going to attack it with your file just right on the spot weld, just enough to get through the first layer of sheet metal. You don't want to get into the layer that you're going to keep. And you just work your way all the way down. Once you get through all of it, you can kind of just pop it off. And what you're seeing over here is the aftermath of where I filed it down, and then I went back with a flap disc just to kind of clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to get to working on this side so we can get this fully out of here, and then we can start figuring out what the heck we're going to do for a fuel cell. All right, so I just did two real quick. Let me show you what we're looking at. So what you're looking for, rather, is to get just through that top layer of sheet metal. So you can see it started to break through the top layer and get into the bottom layer on both of those. That's perfect. See, I already did that one, and that's exactly how it should come apart. So once you get through it, you can see it just kind of like lifts up and separates from the bottom part without getting messed up, right? Because if you tried to do this with a drill bit or something, you would end up drilling into the sheet metal that you want to keep. It would work, you'd get this out of the way, but you would totally mess this up, which we don't want to do. Proof that you can remove half a gas tank without dropping the subframe, but I wouldn't recommend it. Stock gas tank's out. All the sheet metal is finally cut out of the back here. Let me show you. And most importantly, the fuel cell has finally shown up. This thing was a mission. First, it was hard just to get shipped here in California because of silly emissions laws. Shout out to Chris. Thanks for making it happen. Once it did get shipped to me, FedEx lost it for a couple of days, so we got delayed. But whatever, it's here. Let's open up these boxes and see some nice new Radium stuff. So, Evil Energy AN fuel lines. This is what the car had before. We are changing it from 6 AN to 8 AN so we can get a bit more fuel in there. This is our cage. I already opened it. Nothing super exciting, but this is the like metal structure that the fuel cell will actually bolt into. Now you definitely don't need that. You can just buy the fuel cell and you can make your own cage, but I figured because I'm kind of on a time crunch and I'm not the best fabricator, I would rather just buy it straight from Radium. I know it's going to fit perfectly and all I have to do is mount it to the car. I can do that part, but making a full fuel cell cage kind of thing from scratch, I just knew they would do a better job than me. So to me, it was worth a couple extra $100. Now let's get to the real stuff. Yeah. Box number one, this is our refueling stuff. I really just wanted the cap here, so this will end up going in the quarter window. Didn't end up going with Radium's quick refuel thing. I honestly think it's way overpriced. It's literally like an extra $1,000 to have the cool like dry break quick fill thing. And then you have to have all the matching gas cans, which I don't have, and that would be more money. And from what I've heard, it's not really worth it. It's not like that much faster. So that's just a regular fill style, which means we can use any can. Box number two, this is the super nice top hat. So this has a built-in surge tank. As you can see, it has a little handle. So if we ever need to change fuel pumps, zip all those off, pull the whole thing out. You could change your main pump, lift pump, whatever. This thing's sick. And of course, the piece we're really here for, the actual fuel cell, certified, whatever that means, SFI, made in America. Gotta love it. So I went with Radium's 6-gallon fuel cell, obviously with their matching top hat and the refueling thing. The reason I went with a 6-gallon is because where I want to put it, I'm gonna need a smaller tank. And I really don't think there's a need for much more than that because this is a competition drift car. It's not something I'm gonna street drive. I'm probably not gonna hot lap it. As long as you have enough fuel to get through 2 laps, I'm always gonna end up back in the pits to put some more fuel in it if I need it. And I think it'll last longer than that, at least with the fuel demands that this car has now. But there are a lot of pro cars that run 6-gallon. I think it's a great way to save a bunch of weight because even with the stock tank cut in half, it was still about a 10-gallon tank because these things totally stock are like 20 gallons. So cut that in half, it's 10. Now we just about cut it in half again, going from 10 to 6. That's quite a bit of weight savings when you think of just the fluid, especially because I had to keep the old cut gas tank full all the time, right? So 1 gallon of fluid weighs about 8 pounds. So 10 gallons would be 80 pounds. We're dropping that down to 6 gallons now, 48 pounds. So saved 30 and change plus whatever we're gonna save in actual weight, like cutting the floor out. And I don't know that we'll save a ton of weight. And we're still gonna keep this thing in a pretty close to stock location. So it's not gonna change the like weight distribution or anything. It's not like I'm putting it over the rear axles or behind the rear axles, which would change the weight balance of the car. We're keeping it pretty centered and pretty stock. And I'll show you guys that as we start getting into cutting up the car. All right, so here's what's included in the actual cage for the fuel cell. So this is the main structure. It would actually go in the car like this. These are the brackets that hold the fuel cell in. Basically they cradle it. So if this is sitting in the car like this, those brackets are gonna go on the bottom, and then over the top to like strap in the fuel cell is this nice aluminum piece here. So I already took out all the hardware. We'll flip this upside down. These guys bolt on just like that, and then we can start mocking it up in the car. So here that is bolted together. Again, it'll go in the car this way, and then the fuel cell sits in this little cradle. Now when it comes to actually putting it in the car, let me show you where I'm planning on putting it. And then it's just a matter of doing a bunch of test fitting and mocking it up and start cutting the floor out of this thing. So the plan is to put it pretty much where the stock gas tank was, which is in this area here. Not this high. I'm gonna cut the floor out and sink this down as low as I can get it. Ideally, it'll be level with this kind of like ridge right here. And we may have to build up a bit of a platform. I'm not entirely sure, but that's the plan. I'm gonna get it as far forward as I can, like up against the cage, or at least kind of on that line there, and then as low as I can get it. Like I said, the goal here is to keep the center of gravity kind of where it was at from the factory, and by putting it on the passenger side, it's gonna offset the weight of me as a driver, and it should be good. I did just realize it's probably gonna be way easier to test fit it without those bottom brackets, because then it'll just be a square and I can trace out what I need to cut. So we'll just undo that real quick and start mocking it up. preliminary hole cut in the floor. I'll just clean it up and start test fitting. This is one of those cut a little, test fit, cut a little, test fit, cut some more, test fit again, and again and again. Hard part is getting this cage in is easy, right? But once you get it in, does the fuel cell fit? Because of where I'm putting it, we had to set it back further from where I originally wanted it because the fuel cell wouldn't go in with the roll cage here. Not a lot of room to work with, but I think we may have just got it. All right, time has passed and I have really just been here cutting out little templates and welding them in. This is definitely a test of patience, but the more time you put into it, the better result you're gonna have. That's kind of just a story with life. But what I mean by that is you saw it took us a bunch of test fits to get the actual cage for the cell in the right spot because the fuel cell is hard to maneuver in with the roll cage of the car there. So that took a while, and then once the cage was in the right spot, we tacked in a corner, leveled it, tacked in another corner, leveled it again, tacked it in again, leveled it again, and then welded the cage to the chassis. And then after that, it was making templates to kind of fill the gap between the chassis and the cage because it's not perfect, right? You saw the floor is all wavy. The cage is obviously a square box. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. Still not quite done, but you can see like this piece of sheet metal here. So it's welded to the floor. And then I stitched welded to the cage here. And it's the same on that side over there, and it's the same up front. And along here, it was just good enough to weld this straight to the trans tunnel. A few things to keep in mind. This cage for the fuel cell is stainless steel. So when I'm welding it, I had to switch my MIG welder wire out for stainless steel wire. Ideally, if you wanted to get really fancy, you would change the gas too. I think when you're welding stainless with MIG, you want like 100% argon, and I'm using 75-25 because that's like normal MIG, but it's still welding fine. It actually welded like better than I expected. A word of advice for anybody out there, at least change the wire to stainless wire. And then I switched it back to regular MIG wire when I was welding these sheet metal panels to the floor. So you get the idea. Definitely time consuming, but the time spent on all the little details will definitely pay off. So let me show you just how tight of a fit it is to get this thing to actually slide in. Because of where the roll cage is at, limited in how far forward you can go. You can see even like that, it's hitting the roll cage. You kind of have to go in just at the right angle, and then it sits in there. I'm so hyped on that. That is awesome. Couple of days, a lot more welding, and a few cans of steel it, and I am real happy with how this is turning out. The back of this car has never looked this good. You can see we got the cage for the fuel cell fully welded in, all the little patch panels done, sprayed some self-etching primer on the bottom there so nothing would rust. Super happy with how that turned out. Now that we've got the fuel cell officially mounted in the spot where it's going to live, it's time to start mocking up some fuel lines so we can actually put this thing to use. Here's a better idea of how it's really going to look. So we've got our Radium fuel hat here, whatever fancy name they have, FCSTX, that's what it's actually called. And we've got our fuel out, fuel in, our vent. This has a built-in rollover valve. Obviously we have to wire the whole thing, and then we have a fill neck that will end up in the quarter window there. Okay, something to pay attention to if you're buying Radium products. This FCSTX, this is the newest generation of their built-in surge tank top hat thing. I got a remote fill kit so I can attach this to the car. It came with a hose and a few other things needed to be able to fill this fuel cell up. Well, there's an older generation of this that uses this style. This is your rollover valve, and the bolt pattern on this is different than the bolt pattern on this, where it says fill neck. So I don't have the fitting that goes here so that I can actually fill this thing up. Kind of frustrating. I mean, we'll still be able to use everything else that the fill kit came with, just not this. That is one thing about Radium I wish they could integrate, like a package deal, right? Like, this is the fuel cell you need, this is the top hat you need, this is the fill kit you need. Bundle it all together, as opposed to me going like, oh, this is the right one, this is what I want, I think this one fits it, and I think that one fits it. Sure, if I had spent more time cross-referencing part numbers and verifying fitment, it probably would have been right. That's on me, but I think Radium could make it easier on their customers if they were just like, hey, this is a package deal, directly put this whole thing in your car, and then if you want to change some things or like tweak some options, that would be easier than literally buying every single thing individually, because that's how it's sold. You get the fuel cell by itself, you buy the cage by itself, you buy the top hat by itself, buy the fill kit by itself, and then there's 3 and 4 options for each one. So I get that there's an option for everybody, and I like that. Obviously that's a good thing, but at the same point, there should be like, this is a package deal for everything you need, because now I have to wait another 3 or 4 days for the fitting so I can even put gas in this thing. But that's okay, we still have a lot of work to do, so let's start running some fuel lines. Thankfully, we did have the right parts to do our vent. So as you can see on here, it says vent port. It came with this fitting, which is just an 8AN to barb, and then it came with all this hose and this little breather here. So ran the hose in a loop or two. We'll just zip tie this to the cage, something like that, and that's where the vent will live. Like I said, with the new design, the top hat, or rather that vent, actually has a built-in rollover valve, so I don't have to worry about that at all. But you do still run a loop or two in your vent line just in case some kind of fluid gets in there. It's not going to end up going out of the vent. It'll just kind of sit in that bottom of the loop there. So that's why I have it looped up twice, and it'll be zip tied high up on the cage. If there is ever any fuel going through that for some odd reason, the likelihood of it actually exiting and ending up outside of the car is very low. Still haven't made a single AN line yet, but I will say the hardest part about AN lines is not making them, it's thinking it all through and how you're gonna run the lines, what fittings you wanna use, whether it's a straight or a 90 or whatever, and just planning everything. And the better you can plan the way you run your lines, the more serviceability you'll have in the future. And that's really what I'm trying to think of, because there was a few issues I had aside from the actual like fueling issues, but let's say like when I had to pull a fuel pump out or something, the lines were so tight, there wasn't enough slack on it. So I couldn't just pull the top hat out with the lines attached. I didn't think of that when I was making the lines, so I made them as tight fitting as possible, and then it meant there was no slack if I ever wanted to work on it. Little things like that, you want to think as far forward as you can ahead, and think with serviceability in mind rather than what looks the absolute cleanest. I know I fall into that pretty often, but let me show you what I did. So a trick I'm doing, something new, is bulkhead fittings down here. Now, I have a straight fitting off that, but so bulkhead fittings drilled into the floor. That's what will go to the tank. So we're gonna have real short lines going from the fuel cell just to these fittings here. And yes, I do have a 6AN. This is for the return, and we're doing 8AN feed, making my life a little bit easier. And there's really no reason to have a huge return line. Besides, that's what this kit came with, was a 6AN return. So I figure if it's good enough for Radium, it's good enough for me. And if we poke our head under the car here, you can see there are those bulkhead fittings, and I just have some 90s mocked up on them. And like, this is my old return line, so I'm just reusing it. I just have to cut this fitting off and shorten it a bit, because this is the fitting that was on my original gas tank. So we'll cut the line a little bit shorter, have it meet up with our new bulkheads, and then make the new lines for the top half. Again, I gotta say, this just looks so cool. So hyped on how this is all coming together. It's gonna be sweet. Oh, got all our fuel lines made here. Making a new quarter window delete panel thing. That'll go right there. So my old quarter windows were super thin plexiglass. They're really lightweight, literally almost weighed nothing. And I'll probably leave it that way on the other side, but because we're putting the fuel filler neck in this window, I wanted to make it strong enough that if you're quickly refueling with a 5-gallon jug and you like bump into it or something, it doesn't just shatter the plexiglass. So we'll actually have some structure here, some strength. That way, when I bolt that filler neck to this thing, it should be solid. So that'll be the next step. Now that I know this fits, we can start cutting out a big hole and mount that beautiful Radium filler neck to this. Here's the finished product. I am so hyped on how this turned out. As you saw, it was just a big piece of aluminum, spray painted it black, put a handful of rivets on it, bolted that beautiful Radium fill neck in there. Man, does that look good. Still waiting on the right fitting so I can actually hook it up to the fuel tank. But regardless, super happy. That kind of, to me, makes the car look more fancy, more expensive, more of a serious race car. While we were at it, I took out my plexiglass quarter window on this side, spray painted the back gloss black. So now they match. Stoked on that. It's the little things, you know, I love that kind of stuff. Now that that's done, we're still waiting on that fitting like I'd mentioned. So I'm gonna turn my attention to the wiring so we can actually start wiring in these pumps and finally put this thing to use. This is what makes the newer gen Radium Fuel top hat thing so convenient, is that the fuel pump hangers come out as one whole unit without having to remove the entire top hat. So you can see that's still bolted on there, which means we don't have to remove the 7 million bolts around that. We just have to remove the 6 or 8 bolts that hold this thing in, and then this lifts out with its convenient little handle, and this is where all of our pumps will live. So this is going to be our lift pump that will lift fuel from the fuel cell into the surge tank that's built into it, and then these pumps are what's going to pump fuel to the engine. You can see there are provisions for 3 pumps. We're definitely not going to need that anytime soon, but it's nice to have that capability in case we end up needing it down the road. Other nice thing, this came pre-wired already. I mean, not that that would be super hard to do, but it's nice that it's already there. So we'll plug in our lift pump and our main pump, toss this back in the car. As far as pumps go, the main pump I've had in this car since we LS swapped it is a factory Hellcat pump. These are 525, I think. And Radium recommends at least 50% of that as your lift pump. So when the car was VQ, I had an AEM 340 in there. So we're gonna use this as a lift pump. It's more than 50%, so more than covered. So we'll get this dropped into our lift pump hanger, and then get this guy dropped into our main pump hanger. I'll have to switch some of these wires up because this thing has a different connection than what it came with, but nonetheless, should be pretty straightforward, and then we can get this in the car and start wiring the car to this. Okay, we'll give Radium a little shout out because it's nice that it comes with like pre-cut hose, which is what you need to connect your fuel pump to the top here. It came with the clamps as well, like a full bag of them, so whatever you need. And like I said, it's nice that it comes pre-wired. It also came with like 3 of these pigtails, so if you were running 3 pumps, it came with enough wiring to do it all. It came with extra filters for your new pumps, and thanks to all that, it made this install really easy. So you can see we got our lift pump already installed. So just hook the hose up, tighten the clamps, obviously plug the wiring in, and then I just grabbed a hose clamp, clamp that around, and it's nice and secure. We'll do the same for our main pump and toss this in. Okay, interesting little development I thought I'd show you guys. So the way this is designed, you can see the pump actually sits in this little black bracket down here. So it has provisions for the pump to sit in where you would normally have a filter. If we look at the bottom, there's like a mesh screen there, so that's acting as our filter instead of that. What that means is this pump can't move up and down. It's fixed where it's at. And the little line on the top is too long, so we're gonna have to trim that in order for it to fit there. Quick trim, so I basically just cut the top barb off this. So we still have 1 barb, and then of course the hose will slide all the way down and we'll still be able to put a hose clamp on that. So not worried about that. It's also fixed in here, so it's not like it's gonna move. But now we can take our hose, and we're definitely gonna have to trim it. So mark that, cut it, slip this guy on, put the hose clamps on, and we should be good to go. All right, all wired up, hooked up. You can see how tiny that little rubber hose ended up, but should work good. I think eventually I'm gonna throw another one of these pumps off to the side and not hook it up here, but have it wired in from underneath. So if this one ever fails, we can just swap the connections from here to here and basically have a backup pump. Since we're not gonna need dual pumps anytime soon, this setup here should support like, I don't know, 7, maybe even 800 horsepower. And we're nowhere near that. So this should be plenty for us now, but I think it'd be a good idea to have a spare pump. Now, like I said, this is the cool part about it. I have the actual top hat still bolted in. This guy slips right in here. Oh, no, it doesn't. It's hitting that hose clamp. All right, Radium supplies these fancy little zip ties. You can see they're not like a zip tie that I've ever seen before. But came with that, so zip those two guys on. I'll trim that down, and now we can throw it in. As I was trying to say, that thing slips back in as one whole unit. We didn't have to remove the 50 bolts around the top hat, and now we should be good to go. Also, I didn't actually show it, but the way it works is the top of each one of these is sealed with an O-ring. So there's a little O-ring that is like set into the top hat itself. So ideally it doesn't move when you pull that in and out, which it didn't this time around. But again, everything on this unit is kind of made with serviceability in mind, which is great for a race car. As always, doing one thing snowballs into doing 7 other things. And I went to put all the wiring back because I had removed like the taillight wiring, the fuel pump wiring and everything, and just kind of shoved it up under the dash. That way I can work way back in the trunk and not have to worry about anything there. And when I went to put it back, I realized everything is ugly and there's a lot of stuff that I just didn't even touch when we were putting this car together because it was a scramble to get it out on track. Now that I have a little bit of downtime, I spent probably too much time cleaning it up, but I think it's worth it because now we can put the old wiring back on a fresh looking car. You know, just threw some Steel-It down here, patched up a hole in the trans tunnel, cleaned up everything back there. Actually did Steel-It on everything back here, added this crossbar connecting the strut towers, and it all just looks way better. Did Steel-It on my battery mount. Just cleaned up everything back here. So now when we put the wiring back, also remade my bumper mount because it was falling off. Put a random little dimple die in this thing, so it's a lot stronger than it was. Stitch welded a bunch of extra stuff. Didn't need to do all that, but you know, it'll be worth it. All that little stuff is things I wanted to do when we first took this car apart for the swap and redid all the wiring and all that stuff. But we were on a super strict timeline, which quickly ran out, which meant a lot of stuff got overlooked. So I'm glad to have been able to put in the extra couple hours of work just to tidy things up, because I don't want that shiny new Radium Fuel Cell sitting in an ugly car. It's finally here. The piece I overnighted 4 days ago finally showed up, and it is the fitting that we need for our fill neck. Let's get this installed and finally wrap this up. That's right, the little fitting we've needed for our filler neck finally showed up. It's this silly little 3-bolt thing. It's an O-ring and the bolts for it, and that goes right there. There we go, officially hooked up. You can actually put gas in this thing. I'm hyped. Still love how this thing came out. Actually use that now. As for the wiring, I reused my old wiring because obviously it was enough wire for that Hellcat pump, but we don't have provisions for the lift pump, so initially I was gonna just do a jumper from this power to this power and then ground it separately, but we're just gonna replace this with a 4-pin connector, run the right wiring and actually do it correct. That way there's no issues in the future. But I'm gonna do that off camera because this video is long enough as it is, and it's just running 2 extra wires and swapping out a connector. It's nothing super complicated. Because I'm not running brushless pumps, the wiring is really easy. It's literally just a power and a ground. You just wanna make sure you have the right size wire for the power that your pump is demanding. Besides, even if I finish the wiring right now, it's not something we can test out because I'm gonna be changing up a few more things with the fuel system before we get this car actually running. Because I figure if I'm doing all this work, I might as well do a few more upgrades, but you'll have to wait for the next video to see that. Let me know what you guys think of the new Radium Fuel Cell. I'm hyped. This is something I wanted from the beginning of the build. I just couldn't justify the money. Hindsight's 2020. I wish I had just done it right off the rip because it's something we needed. It caused me a bunch of problems not having it, and fingers crossed all those problems are gone now. But regardless, let me know what you think. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and of course, catch you in the next one.